Good evening, Mr. Tompkins, and thank you for coming in. Mr. Tompkins, I wanted you to come in because, unfortunately, I have some less than favorable news to deliver to you about our case at the Supreme Court level. I wanted to take a few minutes to walk you through the decision at the Supreme Court level, why that decision was made, and what it means to you. Going back and from the beginning, as you remember, we filed this case in federal court. Now, we were able to file this case in federal court, Mr. Tompkins, because you are a resident of Pennsylvania and Erie Railroad is a resident of New York, and our dollar claim exceeded a certain amount, which allowed us to bring your case at the federal level. Now, we filed this case at federal level because federal law is more favorable to you than your local Pennsylvania law, and here's why. At the federal level, what the federal law says in this case is when you are walking down that path, the railroad was inviting you in. You were an invitee of that railroad. And because the railroad invited you in, it had a duty to keep you safe. And when it hit your arm, it breached that duty. It created an injury, obviously, and we have a negligence claim. That's under federal law. Now on appeal, when it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, Erie Railroad was saying no, federal law should not apply. Pennsylvania law should apply. Now, under Pennsylvania law says that, hey, when you're walking down that path, the railroad does not owe you a duty. In fact, you're trespassing on the railroad's land. And because you are trespassing, the railroad doesn't owe you a duty. And because the railroad doesn't owe you a duty, there's no breach of duty when the railroad hit you and injured your arm and tore your arm off. Now, that's unfortunate because we have an instance of state law conflicting with federal law. And your question is, why is that the case? And in our legal system, we do see that sometimes that state law and federal law does conflict. And when this case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, the question was, which law applies? Is it state law? Is it federal law? What the Supreme Court ruled was, because of the way that we came into federal court, it's called diversity jurisdiction. You in Pennsylvania, Erie Railroad in New York, dollar amount exceeds a certain amount in this case. Because of the way that we came in, that state law applies. Had we come in under some type of federal issue, federal law that's overarching, federal law would apply, but that's not the instance in this case. So the Supreme Court said because we came in under diversity jurisdiction, that state law applies. State law, as a reminder, under Pennsylvania law says that Erie Railroad does not owe you a duty because you are a trespasser on their land. And because they do not owe you a duty when they hit your arm, they didn't breach anything. Therefore, we have no negligence claim. So what does this mean to you? Because Pennsylvania law applies in this case, and it's a Supreme Court decision, unfortunately, Mr. Tompkins, the rulings that we received at the trial court level and at the Court of Appeals level no longer apply. So the $30,000 that we were awarded at the trial level and at the appeal court level, we're not going to get. I don't necessarily understand this decision and necessarily agree with it, but unfortunately it's the decision of the Supreme Court, and Mr. Tompkins, unfortunately, you will not be getting the $30,000.